Welcome to part 2 of my build of the quarter-scale jerry-bait Cessna 172 Skyhawk. This video is a slideshow with a voiceover of some pictures I took while building it. Day 7. Now I'm going to start building the fuselage, and for that I must have the main landing gear ready. A friend of mine gave me some old Volvo aluminium bumpers from the 1980s, and I used one of them to make up the landing gear. Volvo bumpers were made from the best aluminium, by the way. I drew up the shape of the gear, taped the paper on the aluminium, and then marked it by spraying with a nice color. The paper would just burn. Then I cut the gear using an angle grinder and a cutting disc. Here we have the gear cut out and sanded even. Fortunately, the workshop where I build my models has a bending machine. Using it to get the landing gear into form was easy. The first thing to glue together on the fuselage is the box that holds the motor and contains the petrol tank. I used epoxy glue to make this, and it takes a very long time to harden, even though it says 20 minutes on the tubes. This must also be square and straight because the rest of the fuse is glued to it later. Here we have the M5 blind nuts on the cabin base. They will hold the landing gear in place. Day 8. The motor box was ready and I sanded its outsides lightly before attempting to slide the ribs and base on. To begin with, rib F1 could in no way slide into position because of the way the nose gear fastening was placed. After many trials and a lot of thinking, I found that rib F1 had to slide on from the back. Then it fell into place. The base was then inserted between F1 and the motor box. This sounds complicated, and it is. It took me a long time to figure out how to combine these parts without breaking anything or sawing something apart. Then I smeared epoxy glue on everything that touched something else and slid them together again. Actually, it was easier this time as the glue acts as a lubrication. Then I put F1A and F2 in place. Now this must harden before I try to add ribs F3, F4 and the wing seat. Day 9. Fuselage ribs F3 and F4 are very important because they carry the wing fairing ribs. To ensure they are correct, rib F4 must be at 90 degrees to the base plate of the cabin. I dry fitted them in place and explored ways of holding them while the glue hardened. Here I have put epoxy glue on everything that needed it and placed clamps everywhere they seemed to be needed. I also used 2 squares to hold F4 at the correct angle to the base. Two slots for longerons were missing from rib F4, so I had to find out where they should be and saw them myself. The pieces TS2 were nicely laser cut and marked. Unfortunately, the markings were so deep that it almost reached the other side. Of course, one of the pieces fell apart. I had to make a new piece because gluing it together just didn't work. Then I rubbed some wood glue into the markings of the other pieces. Then I used these TS pieces and the RWF to mark out where the back window will come. The side elevation of the plane is only 198 centimeters long, but should be 208 centimeters. The plans are far from being correct, and this time there are no slots and cutouts for the pieces to fall into the correct places. I have to estimate where the fuselage formers should be and I started with F5 and F6. To get the fuselage to come out straight and true, I have started making feet that will lift the main longeron while I place the next formers and start gluing on the 3mm outer skin. Day 10. Today I installed the rear fuselage formers and the longerons around them. It sounds like an easy job, but it took me nearly the whole morning to fit everything correctly together. And then, when everything was the way it was supposed to be, I poured some thin CA glue into every joint. That is the fuselage form complete. I tried the horizontal stab in place on top of the stab seats, and it fit perfectly and level. This is actually starting to look like a Cessna. Now I have to find 3mm balsa boards and start plunking the fuse. Day 11. I cut the fuselage from the legs and turned it around to glue down the stringers under the cabin or nose area. That's when I noticed that I should have had the main landing gear on before gluing the longerons on, because it comes under them. I put the gear on and discovered that the holes in it are placed directly under the stringers. I had to double the stringers and then cut slots for the bolts to pass through. It is possible that I will open the bottom where the gear is to enable me to remove it at a later stage. Then I started gluing the 3mm balsa skin on. I began with the bottom and was able to glue down half of it this morning. The balsa skin can go on in whole boards in places, but in other places I will have to resort to planking.